The storm didn't ask permission. It screamed against the glass, rattled the window frames, and flooded the alleyways below. But inside Ellie Turner's cramped apartment, it was the silence that hurt the most. She sat cross-legged on the worn couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders like armor. The world outside was chaos, but inside, everything was still and hollow. A mug of tea sat untouched on the coffee table, long gone cold, just like everything else in her life since the day it all came undone. She hadn't spoken to anyone. All day, no calls, no pings, just the storm. Drip, drip, each droplet from the cracked ceiling echoed louder than the last. The metal bowl on the floor had been her late mother's, one of the few things she'd kept after the funeral. It wasn't just collecting rainwater, it was collecting weight. Her thoughts wandered again to the email that ended her job. The toothbrush no longer in the bathroom, and the voicemail she still couldn't delete her mom's voice reminding her to water the plants. The plants were all dead now. Some days she barely remembered to eat. Other days she wished she'd forget how to feel. Then came the sound. It sliced through the wind like a siren, not the shriek of a storm or the clatter of loose metal. It was a howl, low, aching, almost human in its desperation. Ellie jolted. Upright, she stood still, holding her breath as the sound came again, softer this time. A cry, a plea. Her heart pounded. The sound didn't belong to any machine. It didn't come from the street. It was close, too close. Barefoot, she stepped onto the creaky fire escape, the metal cold against her skin. The wind clawed at her hair and yanked the blanket from her shoulders. But she didn't stop. She squinted through the rain, her fingers gripping the rusty railing. That's when she saw it movement above, a shadow half obscured by the pounding rain. Her breath caught in her throat. Something, someone, was up there. A flash of lightning split the sky, bathing the rooftop in white for half a second. A dog, large, soaked, and still, lying on its side near the far edge of the roof, legs curled in, ears flattened. A German shepherd, alone, she gasped. The next flash showed more blood on its hind leg, matted fur, and a twisted posture that screamed pain. Ellie's chest tightened. Oh my God! The storm roared louder, as if challenging her to move. The metal ladder clanged under her weight as she climbed, heart hammering. Rain blinded her, hands slipping on each rung. She nearly lost her grip once, then again. But something stronger than fear pushed her on. Not just pity, not just instinct. She had no idea who this dog was. Why was he there? How he got up? But she knew one thing. He wouldn't survive if she left him at the top. She approached slowly, breath ragged, clothes soaked to her bones. The dog didn't move. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, ears twitching slightly with each thunderclap. One leg was bent at a painful angle, and blood mixed with rainwater in little rivulets down the rooftop. But it was his eyes that caught her, not wild, not aggressive, just waiting. Ellie lowered herself beside him, her hand trembling as she reached out. She didn't touch him, not yet. She just let him see her. I'm not here to hurt you, she whispered. He didn't growl. He didn't retreat. He just watched. Lightning flickered again. Thunder rolled low like a warning. But at that moment, none of it mattered. Ellie crouched beside the dog, her heart aching in a way she couldn't explain. This wasn't about saving something weak. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about not leaving, not this time. She didn't know what she was going to do. or how she'd get him down safely. But she knew one thing with perfect clarity. She wasn't walking away. Ellie dropped to her knees beside the dog, her breath catching in her throat as cold rain soaked through her jeans. The German shepherd lay motionless, ribs rising with ragged breaths. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle, fur matted with blood, but his eyes, those eyes met hers, not with fear, not with aggression, with something quieter, sadder. He didn't try to run, he couldn't, but he also didn't flinch. He just watched her, as if waiting to see if she'd do what the others hadn't. "I see you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I've got you." As she moved closer, her fingers brushing the soaked fur near his neck, she felt something rough and frayed beneath the thick coat. A rope, torn and dirty. No collar, no ID tag. Just a crude knot, half undone, as if someone had tied him and then walked away. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't a lost dog. He'd been left. "I don't know what happened to you," she murmured. Eyes stinging not from the rain, "but it's not going to end here." The dog's head dipped slightly, barely a motion, but she saw it. Back inside, hands trembling, Ellie reached for her phone with numb fingers. She dialed animal control, voice sharp with urgency. "There's a dog injured on the roof. He needs help, please." The voice on the other end sighed. "We've got a storm emergency. Response times are delayed 48 hours minimum." "He won't make it that long," she snapped. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Unless it's life-threatening to a human, we can't dispatch during the storm." Ellie stood frozen, staring at her phone. No one was coming. She looked back at the rooftop through the dripping window. Then she moved. Ellie returned to the roof, soaking wet again, dragging a thick winter jacket with her. She didn't know if it would help or if he'd even let her get close again. But the dog didn't growl. He only let out a low, pitiful whine as she gently lifted him. He was heavier than she expected, pure muscle under-soaked fanned, his body tensed against hers, easy. "I've got you," she whispered, steadying him against her shoulder, step by step. She climbed down, bracing herself against the slippery ladder, holding him with every ounce of strength she had. Not one soul on the street noticed, not one car slowed down, but in her arms, something broken was being carried toward safety. She laid him down gently on a pile of old towels in the corner of the bathroom, the only warm, enclosed space she had. The heater buzzed. The tiles were cold. Ellie crouched beside him, grabbing peroxide gauze and the tweezers she used for photo projects. Her hands shook. She wasn't trained for this, but she had to try. The dog winced, letting out a deep, guttural noise as she began cleaning the wound. Blood mixed with disinfectant, staining the towels. He didn't snap, didn't bite, just stared at her with wide, weary eyes. "It's okay," she breathed, more to herself than to him. "It's okay now," as she dabbed around the deepest gash. He let out a low groan, not sharp, but warning. A boundary, a history. Ellie froze, her hands suspended in mid-air. Then slowly she backed off, but didn't leave. "I hear you," she whispered, eyes locked on his. "I'll stop. You don't have to protect yourself right now." To her surprise, the growl faded. His body relaxed just a little. Not surrender, just trust in the smallest dose. For someone like him, that was everything. The storm still raged outside, but inside the bathroom, there was only silence. Ellie sat beside him, exhaustion settling in her bones. She looked into his eyes, again soft brown now, not glassy or guarded, You just showed up, she murmured. Out of nowhere, she reached out, brushing his uninjured paw. Shadow, she whispered. That's what I'll call you. The name fits. Not just because he'd emerged from darkness, but because he understood it. Wrapped in towels, Shadow lay curled near the space heater, breathing slow, watchful, but no longer tense. Ellie sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees hugged to her chest. The bathroom smelled like wet fur and antiseptic, and her whole body ached from the cold. But something had shifted. He wasn't hers, not yet, but they had shared something now, a choice, a moment that neither could take back. As thunder rolled, far above, Ellie whispered into the quiet, "We'll figure this out, together." And Shadow, eyes fluttering closed, didn't look away. The plate sat untouched beside the towel pile. Chicken, warm rice, even a little broth. Ellie had tried everything she could think of, but Shadow wouldn't eat. He stared straight ahead, eyes locked on a crack in the bathroom tile, breathing shallow, body still. Ellie sat cross-legged a few feet away, watching him with a quiet ache in her chest. His silence wasn't just exhaustion, it was something deeper, a surrender to whatever had come before her. "You're safe now," she whispered, unsure whether she said it for him or for herself. Shadow didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. The first time Ellie stood, just to stretch her legs, Shadow jerked backward with a low grouch, a flash of fear, nothing more. She froze immediately. "I'm not going to hurt you," she murmured, crouching back down. Every day after that, it was the same. Sudden movements made him jump. Plastic bags, a clunking pan, even her keys dropping on the counter each sound. Chipped away at whatever fragile ground they'd built. But she stayed, again and again. "Whatever someone did to you," she said one night, "that's not me, I promise." And slowly, his eyes began to follow her instead of fleeing her. Ellie learned his rhythms. He didn't like mornings, or traffic, or crowds, but nighttime. That was when he breathed easiest. So they walked in the dark, down quiet streets lit only by yellow porch lamps, past shuttered storefronts and sleepy alleyways. Shadow walked a few paces behind her at first, leash slack, alert but not afraid. When headlights passed, his ears twitched, but he didn't bolt. Ellie kept her voice low, her steps steady. "You do better in the dark," she said one night, offering a smile he couldn't see. "So do I." For the first time, he walked beside her. One particularly cold evening, Ellie paused under a the leash loose in her hand, the leash loose in her hand. Without thinking, she reached out, just a fingertip to the edge of his back. He flinched but didn't move. Her fingers slid gently through the damp fur. Slow, careful, his head turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge her. It was small. A second, maybe two, but it was everything. Ellie blinked back a rush of warmth in her chest. She didn't say anything. She just kept walking. Shadow followed closer than before. Later that week, she finally tried brushing him. Shadow froze when she lifted the comb, so she sat down beside him, let him sniff it, and waited. With slow strokes, she pulled through the knots and mud. That's when she found them lines and ridges along his sides, some faint, some deep, marks left not by nature, but by hands. Her own hand trembled as she kept brushing. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. For whoever made you think pain was normal, he didn't move, but he stayed. It was supposed to be a quiet evening walk. They were near the park when it happened, burst of red exploded overhead, loud and sharp. Fireworks. In an instant, Shadow snapped. He bolted, yanking the leash so hard Ellie was pulled forward, stumbling, her knees scraping pavement. She gripped the leash with both hands as he dragged her into the street. Shadow. She cried, but he was in a trance, stale, tucked eyes, wild, muscles burning with panic. Another firework popped, and he swerved, nearly hitting a post. Ellie didn't let go. They finally stopped behind a dumpster in a back alley, both of them panting, soaked in sweat and fear. Ellie collapsed to her knees, gasping. Blood trickled down her shin where she'd fallen. Shadow trembled, pressed against the wall, body rigid. She scooted closer, still holding the leash, not tightening it, just being there. "It's okay," she whispered, voice hoarse. "You're safe. I've got you." Her hands trembled, but she reached out anyway, resting her palm lightly on his side. His breathing slowed, not a word was spoken, but something shifted between them again. That night, they walked home in silence. Shadow didn't lead or lag behind. He walked at her side. Back in the apartment, he curled near the radiator, closer than ever before. Ellie sat nearby, watching him with quiet awe. "You didn't run from me," she said softly. "Not really." He raised his head slightly. Eyes met hers. That was the moment she knew it wasn't just survival anymore. He trusted her. Not completely, not yet, but it was enough. Some nights, words were easier than silence. Ellie sat on the floor, back against the couch, knees tucked in. Shadow lay nearby, head resting on his paws, watching her. She told him about her mum, about the phone call she never returned, the last photo they took together, the silence that followed. She told him about losing her job, her apartment almost slipping away, and the dream she abandoned of starting an animal rescue photo exhibit. Shadow didn't move, didn't interrupt, but he listened, eyes soft, ears relaxed. For the first time in a long while, she felt heard. It happened gradually. A week later, maybe two, his eyes, once dull and distant, began to shine. Not brightly, not all at once, but there was something new, something alive. When she walked into the room, he lifted his head. When she laughed, his ears perked. And when she cried, he sat beside her without being asked. Shadow no longer looked like a dog waiting for the end. He looked like someone learning to live again. It was just another walk, same quiet sidewalk, same leash loose in Ellie's hand as Shadow trotted beside her, head high. But then she saw it. A flyer, bright red ink, missing large German Shepherd. The photo was grainy, but the eyes... Ellie didn't need to read the rest. She knew. Her steps slowed, heart thudding in her chest. Shadow paused, glancing back at her. A part of her wanted to rip the flyer down, pretending it didn't exist. But another part whispered, "What if someone's looking for him?" She tore off the number at the bottom, hand shaking. Back home, Ellie sat with the slip of paper in her lap. She dialed the number. The man who answered didn't ask how the dog was. Didn't ask if he was safe. "Where is he?" the voice barked. "He's mine." Ellie's gut twisted. "You said he was missing. Can you describe him?" "He's black and tan, big. Answers to Diesel. He's chipped, and he's not yours. His." Tone wasn't one of grief or gratitude. It was controlled. Ownership. Ellie's voice turned to steel. "If he's chipped, then you should have no problem proving it." Click, he hung up. She sat still, the silence buzzing in her ears. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. Something was wrong off in a way she couldn't ignore. She searched everything she could find, keywords like dogfighting, underground kennels, abandoned German shepherds. It didn't take long. A name linked to the phone number, a man with priors, a location on the outskirts of town, articles about raids, seizures of injured dogs. She clicked on photo after photo, torn ropes, scarred faces. One of the dogs even looked like Shadow. Ellie's stomach turned. He hadn't been lost. He'd been freed and someone wanted to drag him back. She sat on the floor beside Shadow, her hand resting softly on his back. He blinked up at her, trusting, unaware, the rope around his neck, the scars, the way he flinched at raised hands, loud sounds, metal bowls. It all made sense now. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "They used you, hurt you, then threw you away when you couldn't fight anymore." Shadow nudged her arm gently, his eyes calm. "You're not going back," she said. "Not ever." And she meant it with everything in her. Rain pattered softly on the window. Ellie was curled on the couch, Shadow asleep by her feet. Then she heard it, an engine slow. Steady, not moving. Just waiting. She peeked through the blinds. A dark pickup truck idled across the street, headlights off. She couldn't see the driver, but she didn't need to. Moments later, a deep voice shouted from the curb, "I know you're in there. That dog is mine. Bring him out, now." Shadow shot up, tense eyes locked on the door. Ellie's blood ran. Cold. She backed away from the window as heavy footsteps stomped toward her door. Shadow stood tall, fur bristling, placing himself between Ellie and the entrance. He didn't bark. He didn't retreat. Just a low, warning growl rolled from his throat, solid, protective. Ellie crouched, whispering, "Stay with me." Shadow didn't move. In that moment, she saw not just fear, but loyalty. He wasn't hiding. Behind her, he was standing for her. The man began pounding on the door. Shadow growled louder, body rigid. Ellie backed into the kitchen, phone in hand, her fingers fumbling. "Yes, there's a man at my apartment door. He's trying to break in. I have a rescue. Dog, please. Hurry." The door handle jiggled violently. She dropped to her knees beside Shadow, pressing her back to the door. Her hand rested gently on his neck. He didn't flinch. "You're not alone," she whispered, "and neither am I." The pounding grew, louder. Then the knob turned. The lock gave a click. The door cracked open. Just an inch, that was all Shadow needed. In a blur of motion, he lunged not wildly, but with focused, instinctive force. A snarl tore from his throat as he hit the door with his body. The man cursed, stumbling back. Shadow didn't bite. He didn't attack, but he warned. He was protected, for the first time. Ellie saw him not as a broken dog but as a guardian. Tires screeched down the street. Red and blue lights lit up the front windows. The man backed off, disappearing into the dark just as police officers rushed toward the building. Ellie opened the door slowly, still clutching the leash. Shadow stood at her side, still quiet, eyes locked on the empty sidewalk where danger had just stood. Ellie wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into his neck. "You saved me," she whispered. Shadow didn't make a sound, but his tail swayed once, slow and certain. Ellie watched from the sidewalk as two officers led the man toward the back of a squad car. The streetlight caught the silver flash of handcuffs, but justice didn't feel as clean or complete as she'd imagined. She wrapped her arms around herself. the wind sharp against her skin. Shadow stood beside her, eyes steady, unflinching. The man was gone, but the damage he'd left behind couldn't be erased with an arrest. Shadow's limp was permanent now. So were the scars. The ones on his body, the ones she couldn't see. Still, the worst part was over. They had survived. Weeks later, Ellie walked into the courthouse with Shadow at her side. He wore a simple vest, emotional support companion, but it was the way he carried himself that stopped the room. Straight spine, ears forward. No hesitation in his steps. He didn't bark or cower. He just stood quietly as Ellie took the stand. She spoke of what she found on that rooftop, of the rope, the scars, the fear, of how the man on trial hadn't just broken laws, he'd broken living things. Shadow remained by her feet the whole time, calm as stone. Later that evening, a journalist posted a photo of him from the hearing. This is what courage looks like. By morning, it had gone viral. Shadow's photo appeared in articles, advocacy pages, and rescue forums across the country. From Rooftop to Resilience, one headline read. Ellie sat scrolling through comments, hand resting on Shadow's head. Messages poured in, people sharing stories of their own rescues, their broken pets, and the animals who helped heal them. Strangers from across the world now knew his name, not as a victim, but as a survivor. And yet, Shadow didn't seem to care about fame. He was more interested in the blanket on the couch and the spot beside Ellie. Ellie finally opened the exhibit. She'd always dreamed of Unseen Guardians, a tribute to animals rescued from cruelty, neglect, and abandonment. The centerpiece, a massive black and white photo of Shadow standing on the rooftop the night she found him, rain falling around him, his eyes calm and waiting. Beneath it, the caption read, "He didn't need to speak to be heard." Visitors stopped in front of it for minutes at a time, some in silence, some in tears. Ellie watched from a distance, hand on her chest. The photo wasn't just his story, it was theirs. At the gallery's opening night, Shadow mingled among the crowd. No vest, no leash, just him. Guests knelt to greet him, touched his fur, whispered kind things he didn't understand but somehow felt. He accepted every hand, every glance. He didn't flinch anymore. He moved slowly, tail swaying, not high, not proud, but soft and steady. At peace. Ellie followed behind him, letting him lead for once. This space, filled with stories of pain and healing, was his domain. And for the first time in his life, Shadow belonged. Back home, not much had changed. The pipes still groaned. The leak had been patched, but the ceiling was still stained. But Ellie no longer noticed. The morning started with paws padding across the floor, the smell of coffee, a tail thumping softly against the doorframe. A reason to get up. She sat on the couch with her laptop, Shadow curled at her feet. They didn't need more space. They had each other, and that was enough. Their walks had become a rhythm, a ritual, same sidewalk, same pace. No need for words. Each step was a quiet defiance of the pain they had both come from. Sometimes people stopped to say hello. Some recognized Shadow from the gallery, the articles. He never minded, but Ellie did. She smiled politely, nodding, always grateful. But what mattered wasn't the fame. It was the feel of the leash in her hand, the steady weight of it, the silence. Beside her, the dog who once trembled at her touch now walked in sync with her. Heartbeat. Ellie had once thought she'd rescued Shadow, that her decision to climb a rain-slicked ladder, to cradle a trembling body in her coat, had made her the hero. But it was never that simple, because it was Shadow's quiet presence in the stillest moments, the mornings when she couldn't breathe, the nights she woke from memories of sirens and shouting that anchored her. He never asked for anything. He never judged. He just stayed. And somehow, in all the silence, he reminded her how to live again. Love hadn't knocked gently on her door. It had come as a storm, a soaked rooftop, a snarl buried beneath pain. There were no soft beginnings between her and Shadow, only aching hearts, flinches, and fear. But in time, bruises became bridges. Anger melted into understanding. The road had been rough, but love stayed. It stayed through the fear, through the setbacks, through the quiet. It didn't always come wrapped in warmth, but when it finally arrived, it never left. Looking at Shadow, now his tail wagging slowly, his body steady, his gaze filled with trust, Ellie saw the miracle not in where they were, but in how far they had come. He had been discarded like something broken, forced to fight, abandoned when he was no longer useful. But here he was, walking beside her through art galleries, meeting children without fear, curling up against her side at night. He hadn't just survived, he had learned to trust again. And if he could do that, maybe anyone could. In the end, family wasn't defined by bloodlines or last names. Ellie had learned that the hard way. Her real family was found in the quiet loyalty of a dog who had no reason to trust her, but did anyway. It was in the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier, in every morning walk, every glance that said, "I see you." They had saved each other piece by piece, and that, Ellie thought as Shadow nudged his nose into her palm, was the truest kind of family she'd ever known.